What is up, YouTube fam? Robbie C here, and today I want to talk about Discraft's most underrated mold. That's right, it's the Discraft sole. Before we dive in, we have to ask the most important question of the day. Gosh, that fly is so pretty. How you doing today, Keenan? You having a good one?
So catch me if I fall.
Now I'm realizing that we're starting a little bit of a series here because we did Innova's most underrated mold and now we're talking Discrafts. And I think if you would have talked to me 6-7 years ago and said, hey, what's Discraft's most underrated mold? What's MVP's most underrated mold? The answers would have been a lot of discs because, well, they just weren't that popular. And until 2019, when Discraft signed Paul McBeth to their pro team, they really were known for Ultimate Frisbee and the Discraft Ultra Star. But of course, since then, we have seen the rise in popularity of Discraft. And I think for a long time, and since COVID, if you would have stepped onto an MA4 card, you would have met that guy who was throwing all Discraft. Now, that guy has probably changed a lot more recently to MVP, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about, of course, the Discraft sole. Now, what is the Discraft sole? The Discraft sole is a low profile, very shallow, understable mid-range by Discraft. This is an incredibly understable disc. And why do I think that the sole gets overlooked? Because I think when we go to something that is this understable, most often folks can say something like, wow, that's so unreliable. I am way too big to throw something that understable. I need the overstable stuff. And I have to be honest, the Discraft sole was not really on my radar. That was until I went to Pro Worlds and actually came across a player who was bagging this and ended up finishing top 10 at Worlds. That's right, I'm looking at you, Sullivan Tipton. So if we've got someone who throws farther than most people who watch these videos still finding use for the sole, I thought to myself, I've got to try this disc out and see what his hype is all about. Now, I made a joke about it, but often we can lean into using super overstable disc, and I've talked about that the hyzer is the most reliable shot in disc golf because you know that if you take an overstable disc and put it on hyzer, it's going to do this exact same thing every time. It's going to go out, it's going to fade back and fall back to, for right-handed players, fall back to the left. If you're throwing a backhand, forehand, obviously it does the opposite. So why should a disc like the sole go into your bag, or why should more people think about the sole when it comes to the Discraft lineup? I think often we go to a disc like the Meteor, or if you like the hand feel of the odd disc that is the Comet, it can feel like, hey, this gives me the best of both worlds. It's understable, so I can throw it on some hyzer and watch it stand up a little bit. But I've also seen that type of disc backfire on folks quite often because it's not understable enough. Take something like this, hole 7, where you have a double mando that you've got to hit. And so if we're trying to take something neutral and throw it flat through this gap, what happens when I throw it too flat and it turns over and I miss the mando on the right, or I throw it flat and it's too overstable and it misses the mando on the left? What if I had the best of both worlds where I knew that a disc was understable enough that it wants to naturally kind of bend to the right, so I can take an extreme moving disc to the right and throw it on some relaxed angle and even some extreme hyzer and watch as this internal battle occurs between it where it's going to allow it to fly straight through the gap. Now, is that close to the basket? No, it's encircled to high left of the basket. But I made the gap and that's what matters. But you know, let's try it again. I'm going to go in the beauty of YouTube magic, clap my hands. I'll be back on the tee with that disc once again. Now, what other options does this open up? Instead of having to be so afraid of missing the gap that I'm throwing on extreme hyzer and causing it to stand up to flat, if I'm trying to actually score with this disc, I don't have to be so aggressive in the hyzer to make the gap. I can go less hyzer and know that it is reliably going to be moving right for me every time. So less hyzer, and I can aim a little further left at the what feels wider part of the gap and let the disc do the work for me in standing up and turning. Put it out there, it turns into the gap and finds its way right next to the basket. Now, this is something that I very much enjoy about this disc, is because something that's super overstable, you know what it's going to do every time. It's going to fade, it's going to fall out of the sky. Something very understable also gives you that same reliability, but so much more flexibility in terms of what angles you can throw it on the hyzer side of things, especially if you're coming from an ultimate background or you love throwing on hyzer. This could be a phenomenal disc that really highlights a lot for your game. Now let's talk about why a disc like this doesn't make it into your bag. And I think it is because this disc actually does what you want other discs to do, but we're holding on to the copium that is, well, of course my hex is gonna stand up and turn over. It's super flippy. No, my dune is super flippy. I just have to hit it right. I think we have to accept discs for what they are instead of what we want them to be, especially when they're coming fresh off the shelf, or if you're a weekend warrior and you don't have the time to really season in something to be that super flippy disc. Or third option, I watched a pro throw this and it flew like that for them, so it obviously has to fly like that for me. For instance, looking at the Discraft sole, I know that this disc, hopefully when thrown flat, is going to be on the understable side. And let me go ahead and tell you, this is a Z Glow Flex sole, which is about as overstable a sole as you're gonna find. Which means that when thrown flat, it turns pretty easily for me as it carries through. Now a Mako 3 that is a much more neutral disc when thrown flat should carry straight, but you can see it has some turn, but it's even fighting out there at the end. Now that's my neutral to understable Mako 3. So when I throw the overstable equivalent as well, that was me even pulling it harder to the right, but it's still neutral, fights out, goes right in the middle of where we're throwing it. Now, in an unhealthy mindset, what I could tell myself is I don't need the sole because I can get my Makos to do the same thing. And I do think there's validity there. But just because I can force something over doesn't mean that I necessarily have to. And I think that often when we think about like sort of extreme utility discs that end up in the bag, we go to the overstable side. I have this really overstable Felon that flies like a tilt. And because of that, I only pull it out when I need that hard of a turn or the wing gets that crazy. But as I mentioned with the understable side also being just as reliable and knowing that it's going to turn for us, I think that we can really lean into and capitalize on that aspect of the discs as well. And I think there's gonna be situations that come up where you may tell yourself, hey, I know that I could just adjust the angle on this disc or throw with a little more anhyzer, but is that always the right path for us? Is there a world where letting the disc be easier to throw on that path actually creates even more shot shaping opportunity for us? For instance, in a world of extremes, I'm throwing into a headwind here with OB on the right side. So if all I had was the Discraft sole, and this was the only mid-range I had in my bag, this can be a dicey shot because if I throw it on hyzer, which is what the shot is asking for, into this headwind, it already wants to stand up and turn over, and this headwind's not gonna help it. And this may not be the best opportunity for that disc to shine, which is where something that's a little more neutral, like a Mako 3, or even the overstable Halo Mako 3, can really get a chance to shine, because I know that if I throw it out wide, it may stand up for me, but it's not gonna turn over, and even then I let the wind push it down, but I'm still down there looking at a putt. If I go with the more neutral option and try not to throw it into the ground, it stands up beautifully, carries down there and maybe aces. That would have been fun. But like I said, in terms of extremes, if I just have this disc in there, this could be a really dicey shot for me because I'm trying to make it work on a hole that it's just probably not designed for, and I end up with an issue. And I think that a situation like this where I'm playing in Kansas or there's wind and like, y'all, you can see leaves being blown black towards us, this is tough, because it stands all the way up and even keeps turning, but I had to throw it so low and so safe to try to keep it in bounds. So this is a situation where the disc, having sort of locking myself into an extreme of I only have that disc, doesn't really work out for me, because while it's similar, the two shots between, let's say, the understable Mako 3 and the really understable sole, the understable Mako 3 ended up a way better option here. But I want to take it to the other extreme, because so often we lock in on this scenario and we're like, oh, well, yeah, of course, I'm just going to get rid of the sole because I don't have any need for it because that Mako 3 was better. Until we reach a hole like hole 8, where you have a turnover shot up to, if you can kind of see, there may be some white, through those trees, and it's just a nice 300-foot turnover. 250 to be precise, but that's straight as the crow flies. If you take the turnover line, it's 300 feet. Now, obviously, that doesn't have to be a turnover. It could be a forehand. And if you are someone who hasn't developed a forehand, then you've probably felt the pain before of taking an incredibly neutral disc and trying to make sure that you throw it on enough anhyzer to get it to go out and stay into that shot. And you've probably felt on that same scenario times where you've overturned it and put too much on it and it turned into a cut roller, especially if the wind got squirrely, or you haven't put enough on it and it actually faded out. And of course, we couldn't go left, or there was danger on this side and I was trying to throw the turnover to avoid it. Worry all around. But worry no more, because that's where the Discraft sole really comes into shine. Once again, thinking that I have the most overstable sole possible, what is really cool about this is that because this disc is so much on the extreme in reliability of it wants to turn over, I don't have to give it a ton of power, and I can just focus on putting it on the line and knowing that it's gonna lean into and ride that, versus going on more extremes with something that's a little more neutral, that I'm not only gonna have to focus on hitting my line, but I'm gonna have to hit it with a little more juice to ensure that these discs stay in it. We'll go overstable first. You can see I hit that with some turn, but it's not flippy enough, and so it just carried really straight. Even though it held that turn for a little bit, it never faded out of it, but it just stayed in that turn and kept pushing, and I'm in circle 2 at best. Now going with the more understable of the neutral options in this Mako 3. What happens there? I early release it because I get a bad throw on it, because I knew that I had to put more juice on it, because I'm actually having to work harder to throw that shot with that disc, as opposed to just taking something like a sole that wants to do this line naturally. It stays in the line, it comes out, finds its way to the basket, and what do you know, we're 15 feet away from the pin with exactly what we were looking for, because I didn't have to try hard on that line. I just got to throw it out there and let it turn for me. So whether you throw 380 feet, whether you throw 500 feet and you're on the Pro Tour, or you throw 200 feet and you're new to disc golf, I believe that the Discraft sole could be a phenomenal choice for you. But I'll just go ahead and say it. Mr. YouTube man, what happens if I don't like Discraft or I don't like the sole? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the best part. You don't have to go with the sole. There are a host of other options out there that live in the understable side of things and so like hold this spot. You can go with the Mint Discs Lobster, very similar numbers. You can go with the MVP Uplink, very similar numbers. You can go with the Latitude 64 Pearl, very similar numbers. I'd even go so far as I believe the Castoplast Sphea also has very similar numbers. There are a host of options that you can look at in order to have this super understable slot, so that you're not out here overworking discs. You're letting the disc do the work for you. And why not, as Hannah Montana once said, have the best of both worlds, where you can get there, have a disc that serves one role for you, and we have this very reliable, very usable, understable option that you can throw on hyzer to get straight results. You can throw a straight to get turnover results, or if you really need a hard turnover, you can throw it on anhyzer, and it leans into that as well. The more height you give it, the more fun you're gonna have with this. It is a disc and a mold slot that I feel like when I really want to have a good time, I lean into this hardcore. And as I mentioned, if you don't have a forehand, this works really well. I've been trying to take the latter part of the year off to really give my elbow the rest, as I'm putting in a lot of reps in form work and form change. I want to make sure that my elbow is getting a chance to rest from forehand, so that hopefully we hit 2025 better than ever. Having the sole in my bag has made me not necessarily miss forehands really at all, because on those 300-foot chip shots, I can just throw the sole turnover and know that I'm going to get the shot shape I'm looking for almost every time. And if you want to check out a sole for yourself, head over to foundationdisc.com. Y'all, they have some ESP soles that were absolutely gorgeous. Like, as a guy who's loving this, and like I said, this is the most overstable sole that's out there, I really was tempted to get an ESP sole, and I might still text Brad to pull one of them aside, because y'all, there were some gorgeous looking soles that were in stock at foundationdisc.com, so make sure you check it out. With all that being said, that is the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and if you agree, disagree, what do you think is the most underrated mold in the Discraft lineup? And to keep this series going, what should we go with next? What company should we cover next? I have a feeling the vote is going to be like MVP, and I'll let you guys decide. If you say MVP, should it be MVP and Axiom combined? Should MVP and Axiom be sort of separated? Whatever it may be. Y'all let me know. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Please make it fantastic for someone else too. But for now, we're gonna leave you with the birdie.